It's strange to think that you might be listening to this long before we ever meet. Or maybe after we've already shared countless ordinary days together. Either way, there are words that have lived quietly inside me for years. They were never meant for the world. They were always waiting for you. If this feels like the kind of conversation you've been searching for, maybe stay with me a little longer. This channel is simply a place where hearts are allowed to speak honestly. If these words remind you of someone you love, don't keep them to yourself. And if you believe conversations like this still matter, your support helps keep them alive. I've spent a long time wondering whether I should ever say these things out loud. Not because they're impossible to explain, but because once they're spoken, they become real. And maybe that's what frightened me most. You see, before I ever knew your name, before I knew your smile, before I knew whether we'd ever cross paths, I found myself talking to someone who didn't exist yet, or at least, that's what everyone else would have believed. Sometimes it happened while driving alone, sometimes while watching rain collect against a window, sometimes while staring into a cup of coffee that had already gone cold because I had been thinking for too long. I wasn't lonely, at least, not in the way people usually imagine loneliness. I simply believed that somewhere in this enormous world, there was a person who would one day understand parts of me that even I couldn't explain, not fix them, not erase them, just understand them. That hope changed the way I lived. Because when you truly believe someone is coming into your life someday, you begin making decisions that they may never even know about. You become a little kinder, a little more patient, a little more careful with the person you're becoming, not because anyone is watching, but because one day, someone will. Maybe that's one of the quiet truths people rarely talk about. Love doesn't begin the day two people meet. Sometimes, love begins years earlier. It begins in the choices nobody applauds, in the habits nobody notices, in the promises you make to yourself when no one else is around. I don't know what your life looked like before me. I don't know how many times life disappointed you, how many conversations ended too soon, how many people said they would stay and quietly disappeared. I don't know how many birthdays felt incomplete, how many mornings began with hope, only to end with silence. But somehow, I believe every version of you that survived those moments is the version I'm meant to know. Not the perfect version, the real one, because perfection has never comforted anyone. Honesty does. Maybe you've wondered whether someone would ever truly choose you, not for your appearance, not for what you accomplish, not because life became easy, but simply because your presence felt like home. I've wondered the same thing, more times than I ever admitted. People often think adulthood brings certainty. It doesn't. It simply teaches us how to hide uncertainty more convincingly. We smile, we work, we answer messages, we make plans. Meanwhile, there are questions quietly echoing inside us that nobody hears. Will anyone ever know who I really am? Will I spend my whole life translating myself? Will someone eventually understand the silence between my words? Those questions don't disappear with age. If anything, they become quieter. And quieter questions often carry the greatest weight. That's something I wish more people understood. The loudest emotions aren't always the deepest ones. Sometimes the deepest emotions are almost invisible, like opening your phone to check for a message you already know isn't there. Like hearing a familiar song and suddenly forgetting what you were doing. Like walking into a room and remembering someone who has never even stood there. Our hearts work in strange ways. They collect moments we never intended to keep, a certain smell, a certain season, the sound of distant rain, the way evening sunlight settles across an empty chair. None of these things ask permission before becoming memories. Maybe that's why healing is never as simple as deciding to move on. People don't remember life like a list, they remember it like weather. Some days the sky feels clear, other days a single familiar scent brings back an entire year. I used to think becoming stronger meant feeling less. Now I think it means allowing yourself to feel deeply, without letting those feelings decide who you become. There's a difference, a quiet one, but an important one. If I've learned anything before meeting you, it's this. Life has a way of sanding away the parts of us that we're only pretending. Eventually, the masks become too heavy, the performances become exhausting. And somewhere along the way, you stop trying to impress the world. You simply hope that one person, the right person, will recognize the face beneath everything you've been pretending to be. Maybe that's why I'm saying these words now, not because I expect perfection between us. Quite the opposite. I'm hoping we never have to perform for each other. I hope there are days when we're too tired to pretend everything is fine. I hope we can admit fear without embarrassment. I hope silence never feels like distance, because silence can mean many things. Sometimes it's discomfort, sometimes it's anger, but sometimes, silence is the deepest form of trust, the kind that says, I don't need to fill every moment with words to know you're still here. That kind of silence has become rare. The world teaches us to respond instantly, to react immediately, to always have something to say, but the people who matter most often communicate through things words could never fully explain. A glance, a pause, a hand reaching across a table. The decision to stay in the room when leaving would be easier. Those moments never become headlines, yet they quietly build the strongest relationships. I didn't always understand that. I used to think love was proven through grand gestures. Now I think it's revealed through ordinary consistency saying up, again, and again, especially on the days when romance looks nothing like the movies. Because real love isn't measured by extraordinary moments. It's measured by what remains after the extraordinary moments pass. And there's something else I need you to know. Something I've never told anyone, not because I was hiding it, but because I didn't know who was meant to hear it. Maybe that person has always been you. Maybe you've been wondering what that something is. I almost told you earlier. But if I had, it wouldn't have meant as much. Some truths need silence before they need words. So here it is. Long before I ever knew your face, I quietly made a promise to someone I hadn't met yet, to you. It wasn't written on paper. No one witnessed it. There was no special day attached to it. It was simply a decision that kept returning whenever life tried to convince me to become someone I wasn't. The promise was this. When you finally walk into my life, I don't want you to meet a stranger who spent years pretending to be someone else. That sounds simple, it isn't, because the world rewards masks. It applauds confidence, even when confidence is only fear wearing better clothes. It celebrates people who always seem certain. But certainty has never been my greatest strength. Honesty has. I've had moments when I questioned everything, not because life was falling apart, but because growing older has a strange way of changing the questions we ask ourselves. When we're young, we wonder, what do I want? Years later, we begin asking something much harder. Who am I becoming? Those aren't the same question. And somewhere between those two questions, many people lose themselves without realizing it. Not all at once. Little by little, one compromise, one silence, one it's easier this way, then another, until one day they wake up surrounded by a life they recognize, but no longer feel connected to. That possibility frightened me, not failure, not rejection, not even heartbreak, becoming someone I wouldn't recognize. That was my greatest fear, because if I lost myself before meeting you, what version of me would you inherit? The one shaped by fear? Or the one shaped by truth? I wanted you to meet the second one, even if he wasn't perfect, especially because he wasn't. I've learned that people often mistake vulnerability for weakness, but they're completely different. Weakness hides, vulnerability opens the door anyway. Weakness says, I hope no one notices. Vulnerability quietly says, this is who I am. One builds walls, the other builds trust. It took me years to understand that. There were conversations I replayed in my head long after they ended. Not because someone had said something cruel, but because I had walked away wishing I had been just a little more honest. It's strange how memory works. It doesn't always preserve the biggest moments. Sometimes it keeps the sentence you never said, the apology that stayed inside, the gratitude you assumed there would always be time to express, the question you were too afraid to ask. Those unfinished moments linger longer than complete ones. Maybe you've experienced that too. Maybe there's someone whose name still crosses your mind without warning. Not because you want them back, but because your heart never received a proper ending. People often believe closure arrives through one final conversation. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes closure arrives quietly. The day you stop waiting for a different past. That realization took me longer than I'd like to admit. There are things we simply cannot rewrite. No matter how carefully we imagine another version, no matter how often we replay it, life keeps moving in only one direction. Forward, not because we're ready, but because time doesn't wait for permission. For a long time, I thought healing meant forgetting. Now I know better. Healing isn't forgetting. It's remembering without falling apart. There's a difference. A photograph can still make your heart pause. A familiar song can still make you close your eyes. The smell of rain can still bring back a version of yourself you thought had disappeared. None of that means you're broken. It means you lived. And living always leaves fingerprints on the heart. If we ever sit together on a quiet evening, I don't want us to pretend those fingerprints don't exist. I don't want us to compete with each other's past. Everyone has one. Every smile has survived something. Every gentle person has learned gentleness somewhere. Often through pain, sometimes through loss, sometimes simply through growing older. Age doesn't always make us wiser, but if we're paying attention, it makes us softer, not weaker softer. There's an important difference. A tree doesn't become strong because it never faced storms. It becomes strong because storms taught its roots where to hold on. People aren't much different. The strongest people I've known weren't the loudest. They weren't the ones who always had answers. They were the ones who could sit beside someone else's pain without rushing to fix it. That kind of presence has become rare. Maybe because silence makes people uncomfortable. We reach for advice too quickly, for solutions, for distractions. But sometimes the greatest gift we can give another person is simple. I'm still here, no explanation, no perfect words, just presence. If one day life becomes difficult for us, and I believe every relationship eventually reaches difficult days, I hope we remember that. Not every problem needs immediate answers. Sometimes it needs two people willing to remain in the same room long enough for understanding to arrive. Love isn't only built during beautiful seasons. Sometimes its deepest foundations are poured during ordinary Tuesdays when nothing exciting happens. When dishes still need washing. When work has been exhausting. When neither of us has the energy to impress the other. Those moments rarely appear in photographs, yet they quietly become the life we'll remember. I've noticed something over the years. People chase unforgettable moments, vacations, celebrations, milestones. But when they look back decades later, they often miss the ordinary mornings more. The coffee shared without speaking much, the familiar footsteps in another room, the sound of someone laughing from the kitchen, the comfort of knowing another heartbeat exists somewhere inside the same home. Maybe happiness has been misunderstood all along. Maybe it was never hiding inside extraordinary days. Maybe it has always lived inside ordinary ones that we failed to notice while they were happening. If that's true, then I don't dream about a perfect future. I dream about an honest one. One where we don't rush through life trying to reach the next chapter. One where we remember to notice the light coming through the window before it changes. One where we leave our phones untouched long enough to actually hear each other laugh. One where home isn't measured by walls, but by peace. Because I've realized something I never fully understood before. Home is not always a place. Sometimes, home is simply the person beside whom your mind finally stops searching. And if that day ever comes, I don't think I'll say very much. I think I'll just smile quietly. Because some promises don't need to be repeated, only lived. But before we reach that moment, there's one truth I've carried for years. That, even this isn't the hardest part to confess. The next thing I need to tell you is the one I've protected the longest. And once I finally say it, there will be no hiding from it anymore. That truth isn't dramatic. It isn't the kind of secret that changes headlines. In fact, if someone overheard it, they might wonder why I waited so long to say it. But the things that shape our lives are rarely loud. They're usually quiet enough to live inside us for years without anyone noticing. The truth is this. I've spent a part of my life believing I had to earn love before I deserved it, not with words, not consciously, just in the small ways I judged myself. I believed I needed to become more successful, more confident, more interesting, more accomplished, as if love were a reward waiting at the finish line. So I kept moving the finish line. Every time I reached one goal, another appeared. Every time I became stronger, I noticed another weakness. Every achievement felt strangely temporary. For a while, I couldn't understand why. Then one day I realized something that changed the way I looked at myself. If your worth depends on what you achieve, you'll never feel worthy for long, because life always gives you another mountain, another comparison, another reason to think you're not enough yet. That yet can quietly steal years from a person's life. I'll be happy when, I'll rest after, I'll feel ready once. How many dreams disappear inside those sentences? How many conversations never happen because someone keeps waiting to become the perfect version of themselves? Maybe you've done it too. Maybe you've postponed your own happiness without realizing it, not because you were weak, because you cared. People who care deeply often become hardest on themselves. They notice every mistake, every awkward conversation, every opportunity they missed. Meanwhile, they forget something important. No one else remembers those moments as clearly as they do. We become historians of our own imperfections. Isn't that strange? Our minds can remember one embarrassing moment from 10 years ago, yet completely forget hundreds of moments when someone appreciated us. It's as if the heart keeps two different libraries, one for our fears, one for our blessings, and somehow the library of fear always feels easier to find. I've been trying to change that, not by pretending difficult memories don't exist, but by refusing to let them write the entire story of who I am. Because people are more than the worst day they've ever had, more than the biggest mistake they've ever made, more than the hardest season they've survived. I hope you believe that about yourself too. If one day I notice sadness behind your smile, I won't immediately ask you to explain it. Sometimes emotions need room before they need language. There are feelings that don't arrive with clear names. They're just there, like clouds drifting across a familiar sky. You notice the light has changed before you understand why. I think that's true of love as well. Love doesn't always announce itself with certainty. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the way you begin thinking about another person's day, in the way ordinary news becomes something you want to share with them first, in the way silence stops feeling empty. People often ask how they know they've found the right person. I don't think there's one answer, but I do think there's one feeling that's easy to overlook. Peace, not excitement, not butterflies, peace. The kind of peace that lets you be completely yourself without wondering if it's too much or not enough. The kind of peace where you're not rehearsing your next sentence while the other person is talking. Simply there, present listening, feeling understood. That kind of connection can't be forced. It grows slowly, like trust, like dawn. Almost unnoticed until suddenly the whole sky has changed. I've come to appreciate slow things, slow mornings, slow conversations, slow walks, slow forgiveness, because the most meaningful parts of life rarely happen in a hurry. A flower doesn't apologize for taking time to bloom. The sunrise never rushes because someone is impatient. The seasons don't compete with each other. Yet we expect ourselves to have everything figured out immediately. Maybe we've been asking too much of ourselves. Maybe growing isn't about becoming someone completely different. Maybe it's about returning to the person we were before fear convinced us we weren't enough. That's a thought I've carried with me often. Who were we before we started comparing ourselves to everyone else? Before we learned to hide tears? Before we believed asking for help meant failing? Children don't laugh because life is easy. They laugh because they're completely present. Somewhere along the way, many adults forget how to be present. We become experts at living in yesterday and tomorrow. Yesterday brings regret, tomorrow brings worry. Meanwhile, today quietly slips past unnoticed. I don't want that for us. I don't want our lives to become a collection of postponed moments. I'll say it later, we'll take that trip someday. We'll make more time next month. Because one of the hardest lessons life teaches is this: later is never guaranteed. That realization doesn't make me afraid, it makes me grateful. Grateful for conversations that don't need a special occasion. Grateful for ordinary evenings. Grateful for hearing another person's voice after a long day. Grateful for the chance to tell someone they're appreciated while they can still hear it. If I hope life reminds me gently, there's another reason I wanted to tell you all of this. Not because I expect you to carry my fears, but because I never want you to wonder if you have to become someone else to be loved by me. You don't, you never will. Bring your quiet days, bring your uncertain days, bring the days when you're laughing so hard you can't finish a sentence. Bring the days when words are difficult. Bring the version of yourself that the world rarely sees. That's the person I'd want to know, not because perfection is unimportant, but because perfection has never existed. Real people do, and real people forget things, make mistakes, get tired, need reassurance, change their minds, cry unexpectedly, law at the wrong moments, wake up worried for no clear reason. That's not failure, that's being human. Maybe we've spent too many years apologizing for things that were never flaws to begin with. Maybe kindness isn't weakness. Maybe sensitivity isn't something to hide. Maybe patience isn't old-fashioned. Maybe choosing love, even in a world that often rewards indifference, is one of the bravest decisions a person can make. I believe that, more now than ever. And there is one final thing I need to tell you. It's the reason I began speaking tonight. The reason these words have waited so long, everything I've shared until now has been preparing for it. Because if you understand this last truth, you'll understand my heart completely. And now, I've reached the reason I started speaking to you in the first place. Not to confess a mistake. Not to reveal a dramatic secret. But to tell you something that has quietly shaped the way I've lived for years. The truth I've never told anyone is this. I started loving the life we might have together long before I ever knew if we would meet. Not your face, not your voice, not your name. I didn't know any of those things. But I loved the possibility that somewhere, someone was growing, learning, healing, and becoming the person whose path would someday cross mine. That thought changed me more than I realized. Whenever life became difficult, I would remind myself of something simple. One day, someone will know the person I'm becoming today. That made ordinary decisions feel meaningful. Choosing patience mattered, learning from mistakes mattered, treating people with kindness mattered, not because I expected praise, but because every choice slowly shaped the man you would eventually meet. People often ask when love begins. I don't think it always begins with the first conversation. Sometimes it begins the moment we decide to become someone capable of loving well. That's a quieter beginning, but perhaps it's the truest one. Looking back, I realized life was never only preparing me for success, it was preparing me for connection. Every disappointment taught me empathy. Every unanswered question taught me humility. Every season of waiting taught me that not everything valuable arrives quickly. Waiting has a strange reputation. People speak about it as though it's empty time, as though nothing important happens while we're waiting. But waiting changes us. It teaches us patience when nothing else can. It reveals what truly matters. It shows us the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness whispers, "No one is here." Solitude quietly replies, "I am learning who I am." There were days when I confused those two. Now I don't, because I've discovered something beautiful. A person who learns to be at peace with themselves doesn't stop wanting love. They simply stop asking love to rescue them. And that's important, because no relationship can carry the weight of becoming someone else's entire identity. Love isn't meant to replace a life, it's meant to share one. I hope that if we ever sit together years from now, we never lose sight of that. I hope we continue growing as individuals while choosing each other every day. Not because we have to, because we want to. Choice gives love its quiet strength. Every morning, every conversation, every act of forgiveness, every shared smile after a difficult day. Those choices may seem small, yet they become a lifetime. People imagine that a lifetime is built from extraordinary moments. I think it's built from ordinary ones repeated with care. A familiar good morning, a hand reached out, without thinking, waiting for each other before starting dinner. Remembering how the other person takes their coffee, laughing at the same joke years later, sitting together in comfortable silence. Those moments never ask for attention. Yet one day, they become the memories we treasure most. And maybe that's the greatest surprise of all. The life we dream about isn't usually created by dramatic changes. It's created by quiet consistency, one day at a time, one conversation at a time, one decision to stay kind when impatience would be easier, one decision to listen instead of interrupting, one decision to understand before judging. Love isn't built all at once. It's built in thousands of moments so ordinary that we almost miss them while they're happening. That's why I hope we never become too busy to notice the little things. The morning light finding its way through the window, the sound of rain against the glass, the warmth of a cup of coffee between our hands, the familiar footsteps that tell us someone we love is nearby. Those details seem so small, until one day, they're the things we miss the most. I've learned that memories don't choose what is important because of size. They choose because of feeling. A photograph isn't precious because of the paper. It's precious because of the moment it quietly protects. A window isn't memorable because it's made of glass. It's memorable because of the evening spent looking through it. A cup of coffee isn't unforgettable because of the drink. It's unforgettable because of the conversation that happened before it grew cold. It's funny, isn't it? The symbols we barely notice while living them become the anchors of our memories. Maybe that's why I've mentioned them tonight. The coffee, the rain, the quiet window, the silence. They were never really about objects. They were reminders. Reminders that love doesn't only appear in grand declarations. It hides inside ordinary days, inside the moments that ask for nothing except our attention. If you've listened this far, maybe you've realized something. This conversation was never only about my future wife. It was also about the version of myself I hope never disappears. The man who still believes kindness matters. Who still believes honesty is worth the risk. Who still believes that being understood is more valuable than being admired. Who still believes that two people can build something beautiful, not because life is perfect, but because they refuse to stop choosing each other. If one day you're sitting beside me, I hope you never feel like you have to compete with the world for my attention. I hope you never have to wonder whether you're enough. I hope our home becomes the place where both of us can finally set down the weight we've carried for years. No pretending, no performances, no fear of saying, today was hard. Just honesty, just peace. Just two imperfect people learning that love was never about finding someone flawless. It was always about finding someone with whom flaws no longer feel frightening. And if somehow you're hearing these words before we've ever met, I want you to know this. Take your time. Don't rush because the world tells you everyone else is already ahead. Don't change who you are just to fit into someone else's expectations. Protect your kindness, protect your peace, protect the parts of yourself that make your heart gentle. The right person won't ask you to become less of yourself. They'll make you feel safe enough to become more. Maybe that's what I've been trying to say all along. Not that I have all the answers. I don't. I'm still learning, still growing, still making mistakes, still discovering parts of myself I didn't know were there. But if there's one thing I'm certain of, it's this. The greatest gift we can give the person we love isn't perfection. It's presence, to truly be there, to listen, to understand, to stay. And maybe that's the secret I've carried for so many years. I wasn't waiting for a perfect future wife. I was waiting for the chance to love one real person with my whole heart. No masks, no conditions, no pretending, just honesty, just gratitude, just love. So if our paths haven't crossed yet, I'll keep becoming the kind of man I hope deserves the life we might build together. And if we've already found each other, then I hope I never stop telling you the things that matter before it's too late, because tomorrow is a beautiful hope. But today is where love is lived. Thank you for listening. Until the next quiet conversation.